What's up, summoners? King Blair here. Today, for Top 5 Tuesday, we're going to be talking about the top 5 hardest to build units in Epic 7. These are units that require insane amounts of investment and insane gear for them to be able to do their jobs properly and be able to shine. Whereas if they don't have this great investment, they're not going to be doing that great. You can't slap a random set and expect them to work. So if you like the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and join the Discord server. Link down in the description. If you agree or disagree with anything on this video, make sure to leave a comment down below. Let me know if you oh, that unit definitely shouldn't be there, or man, you forgot this really hard to build unit. But with that out of the way, let's get to the top 5, starting with the honorable mentions. Now, there are hundreds of honorable mentions that I could have gone on, but I'm going to pick 2 that kind of encompass the idea of the units that could have made the honorable mention. So first, for that, I'm going to be using Kisei first, and this is going to be for a lot of speed DPSs. So think of units like Tamaro Luluka. Tamaro Luluka and Kisei are both very hard units to build. For Kisei in particular, she does have pretty high base speed, and she does have the EE making her faster, but the thing with most speed DPSs is they need to take turn 1 first, especially when they don't have things or access to things like Guiding Light. So for example, Kisei, if she does not take turn 1, she's going to get popped. Right? Same thing with Tamaro Luluka. If Tamaro Luluka does not take turn 1, she is going to get popped. They're getting deleted. So because of that, they need to have insane speeds, right? We're talking like 260 upwards to 270 to properly be able to go into the team and be able to cut in. If you're using them against tanks only, it does get a little bit easier, which is why they're on this list. But for the most part, very, very hard to do. Need to be able to have the damage and the speed to not only take turn 1, but also do significant damage. That's often why you see them be picked last, because usually you don't want to take them against a fast team or allow the opponent to pick speed contesters to outspeed you. But people, for Kisei in particular, why she's the one I talked about, is people do take her to speed contests certain times because of that speed EE, and they will have some dummy Kiseis with like 280 speed plus and like 3,000, almost 4k attack, and almost 300 critical hit damage. There are some crazy Kiseis out there, and those Kiseis give people nightmares with how good she can be with godly gear. And now with Carrot too, she could honestly be really good, but just know if you want to invest in her, it's going to be very, very hard for you to do that. Now, the other honorable mention, which kind of just encompasses a lot of cleave units, and I know a lot of people are going to say cleave is the hardest things to build. We're going to use a unit like Pavel. So for the most part, cleave, again, is going to be pretty hard because they do need to have very high speed. While Pavel does have one of the higher base speeds in the game, it's really hard to build him, again, because he needs to have 300 plus, like insane speed, so you can't get speed contested, and still needs to be able to do his job, which is to kill one target when he soul burns with that S3, kill a priority unit. So units like Pavel, and for a lot of cleave units that are very fast, very powerful, again, kind of go into a speed DPS, but hit more for things like cleave, where cleave needs insane speed gear to be able to function properly, which is why a lot of people are not able to cleave, right? If you don't have the speed gear, you're not going to be able to really cleave because people will be able to outspeed you with some crazy F10s that are out there. But with that out of the way, let's actually get to these top 5, starting with none other than number 5. We have no units that we kind of relate to these other units, but we're going to be talking about the assassins. The assassins are going to be at this number 5 slot. Why do they get on the list versus the other 2? And who are we talking about? We're talking about a Kali and we're talking about a Sid. Why are they on here whereas the other units that I talked about like Kisei are not? Well, because these are the units that are trying to speed contest. These units are the ones you pick to try to take turn 1 advantage away from your opponent, right? So in the case of Assassin Sid, this unit is extremely hard to build. While he does get a lot of help as far as crit rate, with the imprints that are not super hard to get, as well as the pretty good base speed, one of the fastest in the game, I think only second to K-Ron, it is still very difficult to build. You have to have an Assassin Sid that is over 300 speed. If he's not over that 300 threshold, you're not going to be outspeeding a lot of cleave players the higher you go up, and he's not going to be able to do his job properly. And then you also need to be able to do enough damage to kill priority target units. So things like F10, can you kill an F10? If the answer is no, I can't kill F10, then you're probably going to lose. The other thing why I mentioned the 300 speed is because of speed RNG. A unit, because all these are so fast, a 287 unit can outspeed a 300 speed unit. So if you only have your ACID at 290, you still run the risk of a 280 unit still outspeeding you, which is where a lot of cleave players currently are. It's around 280. So because of that, extremely hard to build, needs so much speed and so much damage to do his job properly. On the other hand, a Kali, again, dummy hard. needs insane speed gear, but more than a Sid needs the damage more. Why does she need that much damage? Her big job, she usually doesn't speed contest as much, but her S3 is there to try to one-shot, especially with the soul burn. If you can't soul burn kill a unit, or if you can't even kill a top model Luluka without soul burn, through a potentially FCC shield, then she's not doing her job. She's there to speed contest slightly slower units and kill them. Can she soul burn kill a Basar? If the answer is no, then your Akali needs some work, right? And that's very hard to do. And it's super hard to be able to invest in that, which is why a lot of people don't actually like or use the assassin units, is because they are so dummy hard to build and require insane speed gear as well as amazing damage gear. One of the reasons, again, like kind of the same problems we talked to the other one, whenever you need speed and you need damage, that's going to be hard to build. But now with the other ones on the list, they're not going to be actually as fast as these units, but they're going to require a variety of stats, and a lot of these are going to be Bruiser units. So at the number 4, we have none other than Apocalypse Ravi. This unit, I cannot tell you how often I've tried to build this unit well and tried to do so much improvements on her, and I see the light, I see the potential, and I've seen the potential in the past, but I know my gear's still not up to par. She does see some play in different areas of the world and has been in and out of metas because of how strong he is, but I've never actually been able to fully use her. Why? She's so difficult to use. While she does get that extra 30% crit rate to try to help her with her build, she needs to have every single stack while being on something like a counter set. She needs to be on counter set to be able to solo and ramp up and heal and not die immediately. And she also needs to have high damage, like both attack and HP. Most people think, oh, can't you just stack HP on her? No, because the S1 scales better off of the attack than the HP. So people have to build a stat line of something around like 2,000 attack, over 20k HP, still 1.4k defense, still very tanky stats, right? And her stats, while they are pretty nice, right? She's pretty tanky, especially on the HP side. Still getting that very low base attack all the way to 2k, getting that health to over 20k, getting that speed on a counter set to at least 180, or as close as to 180, as close as 200, honestly. Honestly shooting for 200, because if she's not at 200, she just moves too slow and doesn't ramp up fast enough. And then the defense at 1.4k, so she doesn't get popped, and the crit rate 100%. You still need to get crit rate, and on top of all that, 300 critical hit damage, right? It is a very hard unit to build. There are people that also go with a little bit of FRS, and she does get it from the imprints. They'll max imprint her and throw a Strix Gauntlet and a little bit more FRS. Man, there are some crazy Apocalypse Ravis out there, but if you don't have the godliest gear in your Apocalypse Ravi, she honestly is just kind of a meat shield, right? And that's how most people do use Apocalypse Ravis, as a meat shield. But she can be so much more with the perfect gear, but honestly, it's not often worth the investment. She's a unit that may get a buff in the future, but just know, if you're able to give her some godly gear, she'll do okay, right? And that's the biggest problem, is she's not that strong right now, and she needs, not only does she need godly gear to do her job properly, but she can honestly be replaced. So it's honestly not worth the effort, but it's still very hard to build, and I had to put her on this list. Now, at the number 3, we have none other than Remnant Violet. Remnant Violet is one of those units that people consider a whale unit. Why is he considered a whale unit? Well, if you don't have this guy max imprinted, good luck getting a good Violet. And I know that may sound harsh, but the amount of stats that you get from having this crit rate is astronomical. 16% crit rate is equivalent of getting 3 to 4 crit rate rolls on your gear, which it's about 3 crit rate rolls, which is equivalent to 24% attack. And when you start thinking of that, 24% attack, that's a lot, right? So not having this imprint, you are missing out on a lot of attack. You're missing out on 24% critical hit damage, and that's a lot of damage you're missing out, and he's not going to be doing his job as well. The other thing is he needs to be on lifesteal, but he can't be a turtle, right? You can't have a lifesteal one that doesn't move. He needs to be at 180 speed to be able to do his job properly. He often needs to have 3,500 attack to higher to be able to do his job well. He needs to be very tanky with like 30k HP or as much HP as possible, and still having like 1.2k defense, and he does not have those defensive stats, right? It's something that you have to force in there while still having 100% crit rate while still being as close as possible to 250 critical hit damage. And then even on the speed build side, he needs to have 4k attack, 300 critical hit damage, you know, like insane amount of speed because he can just get outsped by fucking a clear and you just lose, right? Because then he's squishy. So he needs to have like some dummy insane gear, whether it's the speed gear or the lifesteal build. He needs a lot of stats, right? He's a very stat hungry unit, and if you don't have the imprint on top of all that, good luck building Violet, right? It is very, very hard to build a good Violet, and without it, there are so many bad Violets that you can just kill with stray hits, right? You can just kill them by just hitting them consistently. If they're not fast enough, they'll get outsped. Like if it's a 230 speed but has a ton of damage, let's say he gets outsped one time, GG, you're probably gonna die even through dodge, right? So that's why Violet is such a hard unit to build, and either build whether the speed or the lifesteal, it's gonna be hard, especially if you know imprints. Now at the number 2, we have none other than Spectre Tenebria. And honestly, between number 1 and 2, I was really debating which one to put up there, but Spectre Tenebria, this is a unit that has become so optimized by players. Top level players have gotten every single little stat wherever they could. They run crit rate next because they give you the most value. They have almost max sub rolls. They use a ton of flat stats on the sub stats because of her low HP, and they have all these things just perfectly maxed out, no sub stat wasted, everything perfection. Spectre Tenebria is one of those units that without great gear, she gets deleted, right? So how hard is she, right? When you look at the stat line, she has decent attack, she has abysmal HP, and she has pretty good defense, right? The defense is really solid, but she has 0 health from crit rate, and she has 0 health from critical hit damage, and she's losing, quote unquote, losing stats on the effectiveness on her awakenings because she doesn't really use the effectiveness unless you're using her for PvE. But for PvP, those are essentially just wasted stats that you have inherently in her awakenings. Because of that, and because she can die to AoE and she's trying to stay in the fight longer, she needs every single stat. The only stat she doesn't care about is effectiveness and FRES. Every other stat she needs as high as possible. People are running Spectre Tenebrias with 3,700 attack. Honestly, I've seen mostly like 12k HP, 1.4k defense, still somehow 180 speed, and still somehow 100% critical hit damage and 250 crit damage. That may not sound crazy to you, but if you ever tried to build a Stene and you've tried to match anyone that's ever shown you their Stene, you'll realize how hard this unit really is to build. Now, I don't want to discourage people that are going to be pulling for her this coming Thursday. She still can do her job without this godlike gear, but primarily for PvP, if she's not tanky, especially in RTA, there are so many AoE units out there right now that you better hope that you're cleaving, right? Because if you're cleaving, then you can go for a more aggressive build. She's a little bit easier to build, but if not, she needs to be on immunity. She needs to have all those stats, and she needs to be able to survive, right? If she's below, like, if she's very squishy, things like Jeeper will kill her. Carrot will kill her one shot, right? Landy will just one shot her. Last Hunter Craw will put her lower than like 25% of her HP, right? So there's a lot of threats against Spectre Tenebria, and the only reason she's still such an amazing unit is because of the gear requirement people have put on her. But now, at the number 1, and honestly, again, number 1, number 2 are pretty interchangeable. At the number 1, we have none other than Martial Artist Ken. Ironically, another unit that, without godly gear, does okay in Guild Wars and Arena, but if you're trying to use them for something like RTA, or if you're trying to use him more effectively and really be able to do his job, he needs some crazy gear requirements. So this guy, for the most part, I mean, you can definitely still use him in Arena and Guild Wars. I use mine kind of okay, but it is very hard to build a good Ken. Why? Because this guy actually needs almost every single stat. Some people argue that maybe you don't need crit rate, right? What about that? Well, you have to remember that you're not always going to get crit on, but you can still have a chance to counterattack, and also your S3 damage. You do want some critical hit rate. You need extremely high attack, because if he's not killing, he's not doing his job. You need as much health and defense as you possibly can get him. Speed, you can that's the one stat you can tank a little bit. Critical hit damage needs to be astronomically high. And of course, FRES. That's the big reason why he's so hard to build. He needs to have FRES while still being on Sigurd's Scythe, which for him, would require him to have full imprints, have a bunch of substats, and still be tanky. I honestly think he's the hardest unit to build right, to be able to use properly in Epic 7. Why? Just the amount of gear requirements, right? Because if you use Strake Gauntlet and try to cheat your way through the Ephras, then you have no sustain, which means you have to do lifesteal, which means if you're doing lifesteal, you need to be able to get all those subs, all those main stats, while still using all this other stuff, which is very, very hard to do. You're still going to have to get 70% Ephras from somewhere, right? While still having him at 15k HP, 1.6k defense, like 4k attack, and 300 critical hit damage, right? He needs astronomical good offensive stats and defensive stats for him to be a monstrosity. But if you're able to do all of that, he is such a satisfying unit to watch and to play with, right? Even though he may not be meta right now, he's still going to be one of the hardest units to build in Epic 7. So that is all I got for you guys today. I hope you'll enjoy the list, and I will see you next time. Peace.